We'll be asking questions. We'll be asking questions after some of the presentation material to get some engagement and some back and forth, and to really get a feel for what you think out there in the virtual room, what you think of some of these ideas. And so if you have a cell phone, in addition to if you're watching this presentation on your desktop computer, having a cell phone might make it a little easier to respond to some of those survey questions. You can also use your computer as well, just opening a different dialogue or a different browser to answer those questions. But those will come up periodically throughout tonight's presentation. And so what to expect tonight. So we can go to the next slide.
Yes.
So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Paul, and he's going to go through some project partners in the background, a little history of the project, a little bit more on defining what is the OC Loops, talking about desired riders, and then really the crux of it is to review some of the concepts that have emerged out of the study so far and get your feedback on those. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. And as I mentioned, maybe do some additional Q&A there at the end as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Susan. You hear me all right?
Yes.
Excellent. And I was looking a little bit at the participants. I see some familiar faces. Thanks everyone for joining, and happy to see additional names as well. So continuing on these slides, we want to move through this. I've got a lot of graphics and so on, so we want to progress. I'm going to talk quickly, but hopefully make sure to keep it sharp for everybody. On this project, we do have some partnerships between Caltrans and the OCTA, especially. Caltrans helped provide the funding for this project that OCTA secured through a grant. And then I work at a firm called Mark Thomas, and I'm helping on the consulting side. In addition to Caltrans and OCTA, the local agencies throughout Orange County have been involved, as well as some other partners such as the County of Orange, Rancho Mission Viejo, and the Transportation Corridor agencies. Talking about what is the OC Loops. You may have heard our presentation about a year ago. The OC Loop, singular, is this concept of connecting multiple routes together, and the graphic shown on the right. The original OC Loop is in the green, focused in Northern Orange County. We saw a lot of progress and advancement of closing the gaps on the original OC Loop by providing that branding, and it got recognized throughout the state. So we wanted to bring that concept to the rest of the county with a central and a south loop and a diagonal that connects between all three. Collectively, that becomes the OC Loops. So our study is looking at, with these new loops and the connection, where are the gaps that exist and what type of ideas can close those gaps. When we think about, as we're developing our bikeway network, the original OC Loop really focused on off-street facilities as much as possible, and that idea continues with our goal of trying to serve an audience all the way from an 8-year-old shown on the right on the bicycle to an older person riding a bike. This idea, if we can serve all the way between 8 years old and 80 years old audiences, then we can really attract a wide audience of cyclists within those age ranges. How do we build that network? And if we think about it relative to return on investment and the use of the facilities, on the far right, you see that the bikeway network, as we know, the more conventional network is a bike lane on the right edge of a roadway with a white stripe, maybe. On the far right, that might be strong and fearless riding near the curb or in a dedicated lane in this category with the enthused and confident. And then we start to introduce things like a buffered bike lane in the second column, where you might have additional paint separating motor vehicle traffic from the cyclists, but that still isn't quite drawing everybody, and we want to get that 8 to 80 audience. We've found that most people are concerned about their comfort and separation from motor vehicle traffic. So the image on the far left has that highest bike utilization when we've got a separated facility, separated from car traffic with some sort of vertical element. So we want to start with our first poll. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, so we want to start with the first question and get you a little comfortable with using the Mentimeter tool as well. So there's a couple different ways you can get this loaded. One is to go directly to www.menti.com and enter the code that you see there on the left, which is 39241041. Or you can also scan the QR code on the right, and that will take you directly to the survey. So if you are able to do that now, that would be great. I'll give you a second here to scan that or to type in the menti.com and that number. That website and the code number will also be on the next screen with our first survey question as well. I'll give you a chance to do that. And once you have that in there, you won't have to necessarily enter it again for the future survey questions. So once you have it once, you'll be able to, the questions will come up automatically. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. So we're going to ask, based on that description of the type of riders or the comfort level of people's riding of a bike, what would you classify yourself as? What type of rider are you? Are you an 8 to 80, an interested but concerned, enthused and confident, or one of those strong and fearless riders that will ride no matter what the facility is? So we're seeing, you can see in real time what the responses are. So far, it looks like we had a lot of enthused and confident riders out there. Right, let's keep going with a few more of enthused and confident. Oh, there's another strong and fearless rider that just popped up. Give it another second here. So definitely have a lot of our audiences in that middle, those two middle categories of interested and concerned, enthused and confident. Oh, but there goes 8 to 80, catching up a little bit with the interested folks. So, but certainly the majority of us tend to like a little bit of more of a protected facility. So go another enthused. Give people a little more time on this one since it takes a little time to get to the survey and get the code entered. Right. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. Thank you all.
So that helps get us a sense of who's in the audience and who's participating tonight as well. So when we talk about the bikeway infrastructure, I voice this a little bit. These graphics show it in more detail, these different options and cross sections. So if we focus on the image on the upper right, option A shows that bike lane on the roadway next to a sidewalk. In many parts of Southern Orange County, you might get an 8-foot wide bike lane next to a 12-foot vehicle travel lane, a car travel lane. In some places that might have a striped buffer, this option B, where it's just paint on the ground, but helping establish boundaries between that bike lane and the motor vehicle traffic. These accommodate kind of that right edge of those graphics, the strong and fearless, that are more comfortable mixing it with car traffic and dealing with the intersections. Then we introduce, in this scenario, a potential where within that buffer, some sort of vertical element is introduced to help establish that separation. There's different types of separation that could be employed. So that's shown in the bottom right. That might be some sort of plastic or rigid delineator, or all the way to some sort of concrete or raised curb edge that helps establish a separation. And we're starting to see some different facilities within Orange County that have these. And we start to see more people using these facility or feeling comfortable related to the separation from car traffic. We have additional options that we wanted to highlight and talk about. Option D takes that bike lane and maybe leaves it in place and then widens out a sidewalk and provides some sort of separation so that people can travel off the street, and you get a mixture of options. The image on the right shows a two-way class 1. That's just the labeling for us to have a mixed use trail where people might bicycle or walk, as well as that on-street bike lane. So you can have faster riders on the roadway that are comfortable with being on the street, or people that really want that separation to be able to use that off-street trail. And then option E achieves similar. It maybe has a landscape buffer in between that space and the on-street bike lane. And in option E, it's really achieved by removing a travel lane from the roadway. So option D might need to secure some right-of-way you can imagine, into say a hillside or landscaped area. And then option E is really reallocating space from the roadway. So we have different circumstances throughout Orange County. Some of these might be more applicable to than others. So this is just defining facility types. We'll talk a little more about some of the options, but I wanted to highlight through the past year, we've done a variety of different public engagement activities specific to this project. So last March, we had a workshop where we talked about the name, the OC Loops, and talked about potential solutions and facilitated input. We've also done tabling events where we go to some sort of scheduled event or some impromptu location along a trail and engage with people directly about this concept of the OC Loops to get input. So on the right, you see this table just in the field at another event where we were getting that input. And then also we've had focus meetings with a lot of different agency staff, facilitating discussion and exploring options. One of those graphics that was shown in the photograph is this board where we ask people, where do you feel comfortable? Which facility would you prefer to ride on? So there's, again, this theme of the 4 different types or a few different types. And we ask people to use stickers simply to vote. So you can see on this, there's a heavy preference for the image on the far right. The far 2 on the right, where you get a separated facility from car traffic, or of course, the dedicated off-street trail. When we break that down into a pie chart, you see over 80% of people would prefer to be on an off-street trail or have some physical separation from car traffic. So with that, we have another survey question.
All right, so now we'd like to see what bikeway this audience would feel most comfortable on or has a preference for. And so of those different facilities you see on the screen, we've got just a bike lane, a buffered bike lane with paint, or a separated bikeway with a median or a parked car buffer, or a multi-use trail or widened sidewalk trail. So kind of an off-street facility there. So take a look at those. And of course, you might be somebody that likes to ride all of those, but what one do you feel most comfortable on? Or your most preference? So we're seeing a couple just for the bike lanes there, just the painted bike lane. And looks like very the similar pattern to what Paul just showed with the dot poster, seeing a lot for that multi-use trail. Just a handful for that separated bikeway, although I see some votes coming that way as well, but a clear preference for having a multi-use widened sidewalk trail. Give a few more seconds here. A few more votes in for that separated trail. All right. You can keep going, Paul.
All right. Thanks, Susan. So this helps to also get a sense and think about this relative to some of the recommendations that we're providing, and really this idea of trying to provide that separation as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is walk through a couple of the gaps, segments that we're looking to improve along the OC loops. There's a few different locations throughout all of the OC loops, so we aren't necessarily going to cover every single segment, but wanted to highlight a few different ones so that we could talk through different ideas and illustrate how certain locations, one solution might be better than another. In this image shown on the screen, we've taken some of the segments that are in the Irvine area near the Irvine train station. And we have these labels. So on the upper right, you see segment 9A. This is near the Irvine train station. And how do we get from roughly the Irvine train station to Laguna Canyon Road to potentially head south towards Laguna Canyon or Laguna Beach? So the route travels along the roadway Barranca to Laguna Canyon Road, crosses over the 405. So we've talked through different ideas and options with the city. We're still finalizing what those most appropriate solutions might be. But in general, what's shown here is an idea of on Barranca, maybe buffered bike lanes, but providing some sort of bridge structure over the 405. And again, buffered bike lanes on Laguna Canyon Road. So I know there's a lot to take in here. We've also highlighted, for example, those cross-section graphics. So on the bottom right, you see that cross-section where Today, there's a dedicated bike lane on Bronca, and we're suggesting the buffer space be provided with the striping and reallocating the 8 feet. So it's a 2+6 with a 2-foot buffer and 6-foot bike lane. And again, the roadway crossing over the 405 freeway, there's an old bridge structure. And in that case, really providing a dedicated bridge structure separate and crossing over the 405 would work well to address this infrastructure gap to help facilitate travel. So with that, we want to ask you, what are your thoughts? And here's the image of that Laguna Canyon Road in today's condition. What are your thoughts about the bridge? Susan, again.
Yeah, so throughout, as Paul presents some of these different concepts, we're going to ask different types of questions and different ways to respond to some of these ideas. And in this one, we just want you to choose a word or two that you would use to describe this idea of having a bridge over the 405. So if you're out there riding, what would this bridge, how would it work for you? Maybe you're saying not safe, bottleneck, tight, scary. So the idea of having a bridge, or this vision of a bridge, look, maybe it's the picture of the bridge on the screen might look a little tight and a little scary. This is not necessarily the proposed bridge, correct, Paul? This is just
today's condition. Yeah.
Today's condition. So having a better bridge, not safe for bikes, narrow, evil, ooh,
Yeah,
caution,
and
bottleneck.
and then on the photograph on the left, we do see the stencil with the bike and the 2 little arrows. Within the industry, we call that a shared lane marking, or SHARO for short. So today's condition, really that bridge structure is built for 2 travel lanes on the roadway. There's no center median, there's no shoulder. So that SHARO reinforces that it's a mixed flow area for both cyclists and motorists. And if one was to look at the view on either side of this bridge, there is a dedicated bike lane on the roadway on both sides. So this is a good example, yes, where it tightens up. It is a bit of a bottleneck. So on our recommendations, we wanted to come up with a solution there, and that's where that truss image was being recommended.
So it seems that there would be a lot of support for a separated facility for bikes based on the conditions that are being described there on the screen with the one that's there.
Yeah, definitely a theme there in those responses. So the word cloud is helpful to get that feedback from the group. Appreciate that. Did everyone? Yeah, we'll keep going. All right. So then I mentioned a little bit that segment brought us to Laguna Canyon Road. We wanted to talk a little bit about traveling down Laguna Canyon Road on what is known as State Route 133, right? Managed by Caltrans. So here we're off the roadway and more managed by Caltrans in the facility, roughly between the 405 and the 73. It's built as a 4-lane road with 2 lanes in each direction. That was rebuilt about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. In that area, we've talked with Caltrans staff if there's opportunities to, explore again the buffer space, dedicated bike lanes, striped out. If there's other vertical elements or features that can help with addressing that separation in that area, I think that the speed is posted pretty high because it's recently constructed and the more gentle curves in that area. And then as you get south of the 73 freeway, Caltrans actually has a construction project that is just getting underway. If you happen to travel in that area, you would see some work going on. So for a short stretch in between the 73 and El Toro, Caltrans is looking to go ahead and improve that area with a buffered bike lanes, in fact, in that segment. And south of El Toro, it gets a little more constrained. But in this area, we certainly see some ongoing improvements and some opportunities for additional improvements. And again, this image, what is a buffered bike lane? So on the right, you see that dedicated space and provide that buffer. Here's the image of Laguna Canyon Road as you go south of El Toro, and it starts to really narrow. There's 1 lane in each direction in that center turn lane. So Susan?
Yeah, so if you've tried to cycle down Laguna Canyon Road, or even have you driven down this road before, what are some of the reasons that prevent or hinder bicycling on this roadway, on Laguna Canyon Road? So you have the option to put in 3 different ideas. And so you'll see 3 different boxes that should appear on your survey options. So what are some of the reasons that prevent you from bicycling on Laguna Canyon Road? We've given a few ideas there to get you started. So it could be, there we go. So the fast cars, so the traffic, lacks a protected bike lane, cars going too fast, insufficient separation, traffic speed. Another one about cars don't care about us. I saw that on the last open-ended one as well. Narrow, again, about the lack of separation, it's just not safe. Can't U-turn. All right, seeing more traffic, more speeds, fast cars, poor roadway, debris, overgrown foliage. Unsafe again, so see some common themes there. Inattentive drivers, dangerous. Lots of things that this solution, this proposed solution, is trying to address. Right. We probably can keep going. Thanks, Paul.
All right. Thank you, Susan. And I'm going to advance, but certainly if someone's still typing in responses, then we get that. We're going to get the output of all the responses to these survey questions. All right, so I mentioned the Irvine area coming down to Laguna Beach. Here, I wanted to focus on an area where there's a couple different options under consideration. So traveling from the Irvine train station more towards Lake Forest and the Aliso Creek Trail. How can one access that Aliso Creek Trail and provide a comfortable space? So when we talk to agency staff, we've explored a couple different ideas. Maybe on the roadway Mirlands, which is the same street as Barranca Parkway, which changes names when it goes into Lake Forest. Maybe on that roadway, there could be the buffered bike lanes. Then the next line up from that, as I go north, is the Losan corridor, the railroad corridor. Losan is short for the Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo corridor. I guess I refer to it so often. Los Angeles to San Diego, it's that entire stretch. So it's the rail corridor where both Metrolink and Amtrak trains travel. If there's an opportunity to provide an off-street trail next to that railroad corridor, traveling in this area and be able to access that Aliso Creek Trail. Or another option, which would reconfigure some of the travel lanes on the roadway Toledo Way in the city of Lake Forest, maybe to remove a travel lane if the traffic volumes are low enough in that area, and be able to provide a dedicated space for people to ride on the roadway. So we've got a concept here. We show that cross section again on Toledo Way, for example, where you still see the car, the white car traveling away from us, and maybe reallocating the space for what today is a second travel lane into a bikeway space that's 2-directional behind some sort of barrier. So this is an idea to explore and talk some more with the city, think about the funding available. With that, we want you to weigh in on some of the criteria to help compare. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, so thinking about making choices on different options for different facilities, which criteria is most important to you in determining what facility or what option is chosen? So it could be the shortest distance of route, what creates the shortest distance for you to have to travel, the shortest time to construct it, so what's going to actually get implemented the fastest, shortest or attractions along the route, the ability to have separation from car traffic, or amenities along the route. So attractions could be destinations along that route, amenities more things like shade, benches, those sorts of things that might be along the route. So it's seeing first choice so far, still separation from car traffic. Back and forth there on shortest distance of the route and shortest time to construct. Still seeing separation as that top one. Amenities getting a little bit up there as well. Still not seeing the separation growing, but that was the first response of a lot of people because that one's still staying pretty strong. There we go. Shortest distance for the route is back up in second place. Shortest time to construct now in third. Those are second, third, and fourth seem to be going back in terms of which one. They're almost dead even right now. So lots of people prefer options, but still separation from the car traffic seems to be really important to folks. Right.
I think Peter answered it, but yeah, I should probably verbalize. I did use the term rails with trails on the screen there. And that idea is to maintain the railroad corridor, but within that space, if there's available space next to the rail or, still far away, but within that corridor, to provide a dedicated trail. So that would be rails with trails. Okay. Oops. Keep going. As we move further south, you see again the blue line, the Aliso Creek Trail. There's an option again to consider maybe a lane reduction on a travel lane on the roadway Paseo de Valencia. There's also this option of the corridor within the rail or improvements along buffer bike lane on roadway. So this gets us down into Laguna Hills and down towards Cabot. And I would note it's not labeled on here, but in the bottom of this, there's a proposed sidewalk reconstruction to provide off-street class 1. That's on the roadway Cabot, south of Paseo de Valencia. So what does that look like? In that scenario, we showed that cross-section earlier, where maybe there's that dedicated space, this off-street trail, maybe there's still an on-street bike lane, and we're really reconfiguring what that sidewalk looks like to have a wider space that's 12 feet that supports people walking and bicycling. So with that, we want another survey question and think about this type of facility.
Yeah, so thinking about the idea of a widened sidewalk, would you feel comfortable riding on a facility like that? So something that's shared widened sidewalk. So it looks like we've got quite a few on the yes side, but a handful of theirs not feeling too comfortable with that option, but a pretty strong majority so far saying that they would feel comfortable there. The no's are gathering a little steam there too. So about 85% right now on saying yes, they would. And you can continue to answer that as Paul moves into the next series of options.
All right, I'll keep going. Moving much further south, now I'm in the Rancho Santa Margarita area. This map is a bit busy. I apologize. There's a lot going on. We wanted to show different options in the area. So in the city of Rancho Santa Margarita, there are a few different options as we come down from Mission Viejo. So along the roadway Santa Margarita Parkway, there's a bridge structure that goes over the Live Oak Canyon Trail in that area, or in this area, this trail that people are able to ride. And this is real near O'Neill Regional Park. So there's different options to travel along different roadways. And again, you see a theme of maybe reallocating some widened roadways that are overbuilt for the traffic volumes that exist today, as well as modifying the sidewalks so that we've got a widened sidewalk that can really draw a bigger audience of cyclists, all the way to link up with Antonio Parkway, which travels north-south and parallels the 241 toll road in that area. There's also an option that would explore connectivity with this Live Oak Canyon Trail and be able to travel down near the Tijeras Creek Golf Course to get to Antonio Parkway. So we've been exploring those options with the agency and trying to narrow the field in that area of things that are feasible and provide some cost estimates for that. Again, this lines up with some of those graphics showing the widened sidewalks and off-street trails. But the thing I wanted to highlight here is the idea of the bridge structure over this canyon up in this top area where there's a dash orange line. In that area, the concept is to use what is a wide bridge structure that actually has a hatched out area that isn't being used besides a one direction bikeway. In this case, to provide a two-direction bikeway with a raised barrier, some sort of raised barrier in between, and still maintaining the on-street sidewalk. So our next survey question shows the actual bridge, and then we want your input on that.
Yeah, so thinking about that image that was just on the screen previously with that kind of ride facility, would you ride across the Santa Margarita Parkway Bridge with that proposed modification? So again, that was a two-way bike facility with a separation and still maintaining that raised sidewalk on the right side as well. So getting mostly yeses here.
And again,
person.
this image, sorry, Susan, the street view or the photograph, you see 3 travel lanes going away from us. And then that hatched out area, the white hatch, and then a bikeway on the right up against the curb. So there's a lot of room to work with it, in this case, without having to widen that bridge or modify it dramatically.
So really working with an existing right-of-way to provide that improved and more protected facility for the riders.
Right.
So definitely seeing quite a bit of support for that idea.
Okay. Keep going. All right. So another concept, as you progress south of Rancho Santa Margarita, you can travel down towards Ortega Highway and Ladera Ranch area and Rancho Mission Viejo. Antonio Parkway is the natural corridor that connects. Today, if you're a cyclist, you might travel that corridor. There's a bit of topography, but we certainly see a lot of people in this area with electric bikes traveling to and from. So again, we're thinking, how do we really serve people that are riding on e-bikes or would like to be able to connect in this area? So within Antonio Parkway, we've been exploring the idea potentially of a buffered bike lane or sidewalk widening. So both options are still being considered, and we're talking that through with the county if we can propose that in our report and be able to have both concepts out there as a potential. And I should have mentioned this earlier. A lot of the work that we're doing is really exploring these ideas and working with the agency staff. OCTA wants to help these agencies get into a position to advance the projects, but typically it's going to be the local agency that is going to work on each of these projects. So I mentioned Irvine, Lake Forest, Laguna Hills, Laguna Beach, Caltrans. In this case, Antonio Parkway is managed more by the County of Orange. So all the different agencies would still have their part to work on, and there might be further refinements. So on the screen, we show this strengthening the connections between Rancho Santa Margarita and to the south, Ortega Highway, where there's a really great trail along the San Juan Creek Trail that goes all the way to Dana Point. Keep going. On this, you see that image again of providing some sort of widened sidewalk with that Class 1 facility, but still maintaining the on-street bike lane. Okay. We didn't have a survey question on that one. We've covered some of the major questions. On this, I wanted to highlight also a segment where, again, we have something that's more off-street. In the city of Laguna Niguel, there's a train station on the northern part, and there's a little icon at the top of this image. And the Oso Creek Trail provides an off-street trail to get to that train station, but it stops at the train station. And we'd really like to see that connect further south to maybe continue all the way to San Juan Capistrano. Maybe it can continue next to the railroad or the creek in that area, or along Camino Capistrano. So we've proposed this extension of that off-street trail that really would look a lot like this facility or this image here, where you might have some sort of barrier between the channel or the creek, and then a 12-foot space for people to be able to walk and bicycle. Okay. I think we keep going. So then we've actually gone through our questions and our prompts pretty rapidly here. I wanted to mention that we are doing a comprehensive report that is going to include these recommendations as well as others that we want to rotate with the different agencies throughout Orange County and get them to weigh in. Collectively, this gap closure study for OC Loops will really help these agencies with leveraging advancement and development of the projects. We want to incorporate the input that we've gotten during our different engagement activities to date, as well as tonight. and really help with that collaboration among the agencies. So all collectively, we'll have our recommendations with some ideas for the costs to actually implement and really come up with some sort of phasing and funding recommendations for those agencies. And the name of the game in the industry at this point is really positioning for grant pursuits. There's some funding opportunities within the county, definitely within the state, and then on a federal level. So last year alone, there was funding in a program called the Active Transportation Program. It's a statewide funding program that had over $1 billion that was available for bicycle and pedestrian projects statewide. So that funding call occurs every 2 years. Sometimes the funding amounts come and go. This last cycle, the dollar amount was much higher, but typically it's about $400 million that goes statewide every 2 years. So this study will identify what are these feasible ideas and solutions, how much would it cost, who's the lead agency, and really position those agencies for those successful grants. With that, we wanted to talk about our next steps, where we go from here. I mentioned compiling this feasibility study, and then OCTA will continue to work with those local agencies to figure out how do we advance implementation, just like the original OC Loop, which is nearing 90% completion at this point. I mentioned again, my name is Paul Martin. My contact info is shown on the screen. And Peter Sutherland is the project manager at OCTA, helping manage this project and coordinate with the agencies and the public at large. And on the screen, we do have this QR code that goes directly to the OCTA webpage, where our final report will be posted when it's completed. So with that, we are available to address questions that might be in the chat. It looks like.
Yeah, I see some additional questions popping up into the Q&A box, and maybe we can answer some of those live. And then I also just wanted to let people know, if you do have a question that you'd like to ask out loud, you certainly can raise your hand. We have some time to take some live questions. We know that sometimes it's difficult to maybe articulate a complex question into that Q&A box. So if you have a question you'd like to ask live, please feel free to do that as well. And maybe Peter and Paul, if I read the question, one of the questions in the Q&A, if you want to answer that one of those live. So one that I see here.
There were two that I wanted to answer that got asked during the presentation that had kind of more lengthy answers than I could type frantically as folks were asking questions. First of all, thank you for all the great questions. It's great to have to spend my whole time answering those. I really appreciate the interaction. A lot of these will go into how we go about crafting the final report. So thank you very much for your presentation or for your participation. The first one I wanted to address was we got a couple questions about e-bikes and e-bikes on Class 1 facilities. What's being done, how we incorporate that into how we think about recommendations. So I provided a brief answer. OCTA has an e-bike webpage that has resources both for e-cyclists as well as for municipalities. Just generally speaking, there's not going to be an exhaustive list of everything we're doing, but OCTA has put out one video. We collaborated with a local influencer to create a video that's available on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, that kind of gets out a e-bike safety message for kind of the younger ages. That got some great web traffic, over 1 million views on Instagram, 500,000 on TikTok. So we've had good luck with that. We are going to be doing more of those in the coming year. We are also going to be developing an e-bike safety action plan. So we're going to be collaborating with our local partners as well as retailers to start to look at where there are gaps in how we're addressing e-bikes and how to address those gaps. So that will be starting in kind of the coming months. And then many of the cities themselves are taking this on either with local ordinances or local plans that help address this, in particular at kind of the school level with kids. So this is a kind of a moving target for all of us. I think everybody probably on the call, on the webinar, has seen or experienced e-bike zipping around. So this is something that we're actively approaching as an issue, and we're going to be kind of addressing both in how we think about these alternatives as well as just, you know, in our sort of daily work. The second question was about funding, and Paul mentioned it. We do a lot of both partnership and leveraging of grant funds. So OCTA has grant funds, the state of California has grant funds. Cities oftentimes put their local funds towards bikeway projects. So there's a wide variety of ways that we go about funding these things. So it's kind of a hodgepodge of grant funds, as well as local or state or federal funds that we can all get. So those were kind of the two I wanted to address first that got asked. And now, Susan, we can kind of start to go through the ones we have.
Okay, so one of the questions that just popped up was, what are some of the things, the biggest things that slow down building different bike paths as part of construction? What are the things that kind of slow down construction? I think is, we talked about the timing and the shortest duration. So I think the question is related to like what slows down and what's the impediments for building things faster.
Yeah, got it. So then I would say in general, some of these things is easy to overlook sometimes. If we talk about moving where today the curb edge is, or where the curb and gutter exists, if that gets moved out, if we have to rebuild it, then that ends up being more costly and more complicated. Not only do you have to pour new concrete, but you need to modify where the curb drain is, where the inlets are when it rains, and where that water goes. Another major thing is moving the light poles along that curb edge, or if there's some sort of utility boxes, or even think light poles or power poles, that cost implication and the complexity really starts to go up. Maybe the power poles are managed by Southern California Edison. So if Lake Forest, for example, was to do a project and they need a pole moved, it's not the city that moves that pole, but it's actually Edison. So then you're bringing in another partner essentially on the project to make some of those things happen. So schedule wise and cost, those things start to really add to things. So we've got a lot of utilities in the roadway that are below ground. They're not always visible and obvious. If there's some sort of impact to those are usually the major things. And while when I think of that, is the question is about construction, but also I would guess some of that is leading up to construction. How do we even get to the first shovel in the ground? So there's also the bureaucratic things, right? We need to do environmental review and promotion with the community, really explain that a project is coming and come up with the best design. There might be permitting that's associated with that. When we talk about putting a bikeway within the rail corridor, for example, that's easier said than done, frankly, because we have to think about how do we provide a safe facility that provides adequate separation from the high-speed trains, and what do we do about where you go under bridge structures like other roadways where the width is constrained. So all those things start to add up into adding to the complexity and affecting the schedule as well.
Great. There's another question about saying, or somebody commenting that some of the facilities in the OC loops not only lack lighting, but are closed off or have signage indicating they're closed after certain hours or after dusk. Is there a plan to resolve this gap? Because this impacts people being able to use these facilities to get to and from work. The comment was that we need this infrastructure to be dependable and accessible during all hours of the day, especially if there's construction happening on the roads and people really need these facilities to use to get to and from home.
Yeah. How about Peter? How much do you want to talk about that? Definitely on this, that dynamic of making sure a facility is 24/7 makes sense. We know we can't expect people to only bicycle during the daytime or during 9 to 5 timeframes. Sometimes some agencies have built what we otherwise would think of as a path, and it functions and is viewed more as a park space. So we want to get out of that paradigm. And if there's a specific location, then maybe you can note that, and we can have that discussion with the agency.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that a little bit, that's popped up several times now in the questions. And I think that's kind of a policy decision more than a design decision. There is the issue of lighting and how that works. It gets a little complicated with how those are constructed, how adjacent residents react to having light fixtures. that sort of thing. There's liability and safety concerns, and these are things, and I can hear the typing going on that we don't tend to worry about with autos, and we tend to really worry about with bikes. And so this is, like I said, kind of a broader policy discussion as opposed to a specific to these bike infrastructure, other than the questions that have come up about the Santa Ana River Trail, the existing ones, about those being closed. And yeah, like Paul said, that's kind of a discussion that I think is well worth having with local jurisdictions, and certainly that I think could be incorporated into, how we go about forming recommendations, or at least our discussions as we've been having ongoing with the jurisdictions just about, bikeways in general, that these are not recreational facilities strictly. These are, we are designing these and have these in mind specifically as transportation facilities, in particular with, e-bikes and that kind of lending a new mode of mobility, both for commuters as well as school age kids. I think these routes are going to be even more so used as truly transportation connections as opposed to just purely recreational. So that's a good question, and one that we'll take into consideration both for this report as well as just general policy discussions.
I know
Great, thanks.
when I ride at night, I've had some people say, "Oh, but it's dark," and I go, "Well, I'm probably more visible at night, frankly, than I am during the daytime, because the lights are bright and flashing white in front, solid white in front, and flashing red in back."
That's a good segue, Paul, for both you and Peter. I know you're both avid cyclists, so somebody was asking about whether you've personally ridden through some of the areas that you're talking about tonight. And I know that the answer is probably yes, but maybe you could just share a little bit of your personal experiences with some of the facilities that we described.
Yeah. So definitely, I guess I've lived in the county for over 20 years at this point, and have appreciated being able to explore a lot of the county via bike. So probably most all of this I've ridden to some degree, but I can't say everything. I know there's some of the crowd in this audience rides a lot more frequently than I do, but definitely I'm always down for a little road trip to go and explore.
I'm relatively new to the county. I moved here about 3 years ago, so I'm still working on it. But I lived in Maryland, and I've before this, and rode. It's a small state, and rode a lot of those roads. So I definitely empathize with a lot of the issues that are being brought up about on-street facilities in particular. So yeah, thanks for that.
What's bigger, Peter? Geography, Maryland or Orange County?
So I will go too in depth, but at least population-wise, Orange County is about half the size of Maryland. So and that's just within Orange County. That's not getting into the kind of the broader metropolitan area, all that stuff. So yeah, it's the size of many states. So yeah, it's there's a lot of people and a lot of area here.
Yeah, look that up. All right.
Somebody was commenting about the fact they like the colored pavement bike lanes found in Long Beach. I'm wondering if there's any plans to include colored pavement for better visibility through the project.
Yeah, so some of those photos, actually, you might have seen, we highlighted in sometimes the bike lane with green. And within the industry, we call that, that higher visibility bikeway. And sometimes the green is focused really where the conflict is, where there might be some sort of weaving or merging activity to really highlight that. So we definitely are starting to see the green paint being deployed and utilized throughout Orange County. Again, this is where you get a little bit of the philosophy of each jurisdiction, and some cities are really all in on it and supportive of it. And some are testing it out. They want to see what it looks like and make sure that they're comfortable with the additional costs and what are the best locations for it. But definitely that's a countermeasure we recommend.
And just to piggyback on that, Caltrans is getting much more supportive of varying degrees of either paint for bikeways or paint that's not strictly what you would consider, your regular white paint for crosswalks. So this is something over the past couple of years that's becoming much more kind of state of the practice and not an outlier. So yeah, it's definitely something that we consider in the toolbox for bikeways, in particular on street bikeways and conflict zones.
A question about vehicle speed reductions, and is that being incorporated or considered into any of the possible future projects?
Got it. Thanks, Josh. So then on that one in particular, a lot of what we've done is really lines on the map with ideas and try and figure out what that cross section might look like. So these ideas like maybe redesigning Toledo or modifications to Barranca will be subject to the jurisdiction and for them to incorporate maybe those other features as well, tightening up turns and so on. So we haven't tried to go to that level to really make additional recommendations beyond on managing speeds or speeding activity at this point.
And to piggyback on, just to piggyback on that quickly. So like Paul mentioned, that's not as much a part of this project. However, OCTA is looking at that similar type concept of, you know, arterial roadways, what you might consider the MPAH master plan of arterial highway roadways that might be overbuilt or overplanned, higher speed, and how those can potentially be repurposed, and studying that very thing of, you know, what the speed is, what the road section is there extra room, and is there excess speed where there doesn't need to be, such that we can use those for, you know, connections to regional bikeway facilities, and kind of building out the network to get from, you know, our regional spine, which is what this is made up of, and to the local bikeways. So while not strictly a part of this process, it is something that is kind of on the docket of things to look at.
Great. And then there was a question that was asking about the Santiago Creek half-mile extension near the Santa Ana Freeway. I think the question kind of got cut off, but maybe Paul and Peter can address whether that was something that has been looked at or if that's part of the loop.
So then, yeah, I know the location in particular. When I used to travel to OCTA, I would take the Santiago Creek actually myself, and really appreciated that. But there's been a lot of conflict and discussion in the community about closing the gap. Santiago Creek goes kind of north, east-west effectively to the Santa Ana River Trail. And there's a short gap, as noted by whoever that was, I lost it. Short gap from Main Street to the Santa Ana River. And at this point, that's really the city of Santa Ana. That segment of Santiago Creek is not part of the OC loops, but the city of Santa Ana is always keeping that on the radar as something to close the gap on. I would say in general, the city's been focused on building out a lot of other bikeways. I think there was someone asking about cities that we draw inspiration from. So Santa Ana has actually done a lot of bicycle improvements in their network. If people haven't explored it, there's definitely some good stuff to take a look at within the city and ongoing. So the city's been focusing on some other areas within the city of Santa Ana at this point, and not so much Santiago Creek, but I think it's still on their mapping as a potential project.
Then there were a couple questions about trying to find out some more information about what's happening in the northern Orange County and the northern loops. Is there a place people can go to get some more information on those projects?
Yeah, I'll grab that link. We have a link to kind of the original OC loop status, kind of status update. I believe the outstanding segments, and Paul, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, are OPQ, T, A, and then the ones in Seal Beach, which were also referenced. And then I think that's it.
Sounds about right. It's a lot closer. So
yes.
Peter was mentioning the original letter names. OPQ is the segment along the Coyote Creek on the border between Orange County and LA County. It actually turns out, yeah, and Peter, I don't know if you've got a summary document or something, but segments O, P, and Q have received funding. I mentioned that grant funding program from last year. They now have the funding to go ahead and construct O, P, and Q. So it's a gap closure along on the bikeway that would be along the creek, Coyote Creek. So you'll have stronger continuity all the way from La Habra down to Seal Beach along Coyote Creek. When that is constructed, it'll still take a while. The final design is underway for OP and Q, but the dollar amounts, these dollar amounts sometimes are quite large. but the recent grant funding that was secured for that area was $46 million to go ahead and do the construction. So that's been secured, and the county is advancing that. And
All right,
then,
well, we just, go ahead, Paul.
yeah, let's see. So then kind of linking with that was, I think one of the questions was Coast Highway from Seal Beach Boulevard to Anderson. That is a segment along Caltrans corridor. So I don't know, Peter, if how much that's come up a whole lot, but we can bring that up and talk with the Caltrans staff about that again.
Great. Looks like we're right at 7 o'clock. There's a few additional questions there in the Q&A, but one of the ones I think that would be great to end on would be, what's the best way for us as citizens to accelerate how fast these proposals become reality? So thinking about, where do we go from here? You did talk about next steps, but what can folks on the call and in the meeting today, what role can they play, and what can they do to help things along?
Excellent.
Paul, you want to take that first? You want me to go first?
Go ahead, Peter.
So I always say, and this ends up making more work for us on the municipal side, but I'm all for it. Get in contact with your elected officials, because the more they hear about this kind of stuff, the more they say we need to get money for this. And that's honestly how a lot of the OC loop that were kind of not the original long sections along the Santa Ana River or the other parts. That's how those got built, is elected officials became interested and made it their passion projects. And because there isn't, and I meant to bring this up earlier, because there isn't a dedicated funding stream usually within the state, it's usually competitive grants. That tends to slow down how projects get done, because we have to go after funds, wait to get awarded, and then go through procurement. So it is a long process as opposed to just having budgeted funds. But one thing that does make that go a lot faster is if an elected official hears consistently, I want this gap closed, I want a trail here. So whether that be, Congress or a state senator or a US senator, they when they start to get and read those emails or letters, that they pay attention, and then earmarks get made or grants get awarded. So I think on, really getting things moving, it's when elected officials hear a lot about bike facilities. But then, general involvement, you being here today and giving us this feedback, when we say we had 50 people on a call about this, that gets noticed. And so when we do requests for budget in the OCTA budget, and we say, look, we have 50 people that showed up to an evening meeting about a bike study, that gets noticed. And then we are able to do more studies and move these projects towards being completed. So I think that kind of civic engagement is really an important part, and participation in things like this. So I guess that would be my thought on how best as a individual resident you could help things along.
Agreed. And I think so I'm all in with Peter. Making noise and getting the word out is important. I also, when I've done some of these tabling events and community engagement, talk to people a lot about thinking about your roadway network or your transportation network as something that evolves over time. And sometimes that does mean that we're doing a system of trade-offs. So we might have built certain roads, say with 4 travel lanes, and maybe to provide a more robust bikeway facility or a place for people to walk and bike comfortably. Maybe that means that we remove a travel lane from the roadway. So if you're making noise and letting your elected officials know that you're interested in that, I think I would encourage everyone to highlight that sometimes that's going to mean you're reallocating that space from something else, and you're supportive of that. If all elected officials here is, I want to drive faster on my roadway all the time, then that's what they will deliver. But if you say, I want to be able to travel via bike or walk in my neighborhood or to connect to major destinations, and I'm okay if you remove travel lanes or you modify the roadway as a result, then they will deliver that.
Great. And looks like we are definitely a little bit over time, but just there are some additional thoughts into the Q&A, things such as we should be considering signage, some additional user groups to potentially tap into, some comments about really promoting more e-bikes and following up on e-bikes as well. So definitely we'll take all of those ideas into consideration. There's a comment about the Irvine train station. Maybe one of you, or Peter, maybe you could address that about the closure of or access to the train station.
Just the one
And
that's,
then,
so it says the northeast access to the Irvine train station, the land on the other side. So I know when we have spoken with the city of Irvine, there is a lot of interest in having connectivity on both sides of the train tracks at the Irvine station. I think there is a lot of movement associated with the Great Park area that's coming. I don't totally know that we have a single consensus that I'm aware of, but I believe that is on their radar, that they're talking to the city of Irvine about what that looks like and how the development of Great Park will occur.
great. And then just a final, there is a question about, will there be a follow-up meeting? There's not a follow-up meeting for this portion of the project per se, but definitely keep monitoring the website. All the information will be there. And likely as these projects go into the future, there may be specific meetings on individual projects as they move into construction and to final design as well. So there likely will be more opportunities to have your voice and to get involved from that standpoint. So with that, just want to thank everyone for giving of your time and for staying with us a little bit past as well. Really excited that you were able to stay with us and learn some more about the planning project. And we look forward to your continued engagement.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, Susan, the question, yeah, the recording is going to be